Today, what we want to do in this campfire conversation over Zoom, video, live streaming on Facebook, we want to go back to Sam's book. Last week we were talking through It's Your Call, and about calling. We want to go back to hearing God in conversation. And specifically, we want to talk about his chapter 2, which is Conversation is the Point. That's such a powerful title, Sam, just because we don't hear that when we hear about hearing God. We hear more about guidance and this type of thing, but take us into this idea that conversation is the point when we're talking about hearing God.
So that was a great lead in, Gary. And folks, we didn't plan that. Although, Gary, you planned to have your glasses on, didn't you? But when I talk to people about hearing God, I would say the majority of people who want to hear God, and most people want to hear God, they usually want to hear God for direction. You know, should I marry this person? Should I take this job? Should we move? Should I study this? And when I think it was 10 or 11 years old, my dad taught me how to sail our sunfish sailboat. We did it on a summer vacation. My dad used to get several weeks off. We would go camping and then we would sail. And he and I probably sailed a couple hours a day, maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours a day on a little sunfish sailboat out on Lake Michigan. And when we would go out sailing, he would just talk. You know, he'd say, what books are you reading? And I would tell him about the book I'm reading. And I'd say, what book are you reading? And it'd be some theological book, you know, so I didn't ask many questions about it. He would say, why did you get mad at your sister? And I'd say, why did you get mad at mom? But we just had fun. And so sometimes he'd say, turn right or turn left a little bit. He didn't like starboard or port or stern or bow. But he just would say, hey, you know, let out the sail a little bit. And we just kept sailing. And we sailed the whole summer. And I would say I probably sailed 100 hours with my dad. And it was mostly just talking. And then one day he said, you know, we walked out to the sailboat and he just said, hey, Sam, take it out by yourself. And I couldn't believe it. I was 10 or 11 years old. And he was letting me take this sailboat out on Lake Michigan all by myself. And I realized that he had taught me how to sail. He had guided me. He had directed me. He had given me the guidance I wanted without my ever knowing it. You know, he never used a flip chart. He never used a PowerPoint. He never used a lecture. But, you know, wave by wave, breeze by breeze, he would just say, turn a little right, turn a little left, let out the sail. And I learned to sail. And it was mostly just by having a conversation with my dad.
You know, and Sam, what amazes me about your story, many things. One is, I have heard you tell the story about your dad and many other stories about your dad, what it was like to be with him, your conversations, your relationship, far more times than I've heard you talk about sailing. So this doesn't surprise me that, you know, as you said in your book and you're saying here, you know, what you remember, what is so valuable is your conversation, your being with your father more than sailing. And yet you love sailing and you're good at sailing, but that's what I hear you talk more about. And the other thing that just dawns on me as you tell the story is, you know, I probably heard more from my father about what I should be doing and shouldn't be doing and what I need to get on, you know, at this point, like homework in high school and these type of things. And they're not fond memories. They're not what I most wanted from my dad. There was a place for that. But I wished we had just talked more about life like you're talking about and you know, sometimes I went to my dad and I would ask him questions because sometimes I was just in fear of a situation that I didn't know how to handle. But that's not what I wanted from him all the time. I knew he had more to offer, but he didn't offer it. So I'm very taken by this story and bring it into the context of our relationship with God.
Well, you know, I don't know if my father was a genius or he just was lucky, you know, I don't know. But I look back at it too. And, you know, if any of us think about our very fondest memories of our parents, and and anybody who's listening, I say, before I give what I'm going to say, remember one or two of your fondest memories, whether your parents were good or bad, what is your fondest memory? And I'm willing to bet it was never a time they lectured at you. It was never the time that say, you should become a doctor. You should become a lawyer.
Yeah.
You should clean your room more. My fondest memories of my dad were conversations around the dining room table, conversations on the sailboat, conversations when we're camping around the campfire at night. And I don't know that I always remember everything that was said, honestly. I just remember it was just comfortable to be together.
Sam, one of the things I really enjoyed about this chapter in your book was your illustration of President Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr. Just that picture where young John Kennedy was playing around the desk while the president of the United States, who's the most powerful man in the world, was doing business. And I think too often we see God as the most powerful man in the world, but really unapproachable. We don't see him the way John F. Kennedy Jr. saw his dad. And I love that picture because it just paints a picture of what our true relationship with God, what his desire for us in a relationship is.
One of the things that I like about another book, here we're talking about Gary's calling book and my hearing God book, is Bob Allum's, a good friend of ours, works for an organization called The Praying Life. And one of the things I like about The Praying Life is Bob keeps these little 3x5 cards where he's praying for somebody, he takes time, and he writes down a story of this person's life over the year or two he's been praying for them, or a decade, and he says he's able to enter into the story. Well, in a certain sense, I feel like my dad did the same thing. He allowed me to enter into a story. So you guys have heard how my dad was a pastor, and we had our main meal on Sundays right at lunchtime instead of dinner time. I never did figure that out why. But anyway, we always had dinner at lunchtime. And our Sunday topics were my dad would ask us what we thought of a sermon. And he really didn't want us to say, good job, Dad. He wanted us to tell him everything he did wrong. And, so we would say, I think your second point should have been first, and your first point should have been second. And I think that boy riding a bicycle was not a good illustration of, predestination. And he would laugh and say, yeah, it wasn't. But he entered into a discussion with us, and he just liked it. It was a conversation where in a certain sense, we were entering into his business. He's a professional pastor. He's got he's got degrees in languages, and he's got a master's in divinity, but he just wanted us to enter in with him and talk with him.
Yeah, that's such a good story. That story along with the picture illustration you gave. And as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, when do I go to prayer? When go to prayer is not a good expression. When do I start praying? When do I want to pray? And this doesn't feel like a good admission I'm making, but it's usually when I'm kind of in trouble. I don't know what to do, or I have a situation that I'm afraid of. And I'm asking simply for a rescue of some type. And yes, I do think that's needed. I think God says, right, you do need me to rescue you. I am your redeemer, your rescuer. He's all those things, but I just am realizing how little I think of I just want to talk to God. I just want a conversation with him throughout the day, just talking, and I'm really talking to him more than I'm talking to myself, so it's a really good point. It's really made me stop to think of, how do I view God? Is he, John, as you were bringing up with the illustration in the book, is he the most powerful man in the world who says, I just love you being with me. I just want to talk to you. I've got business to take care of, but you know what? You're also my business. And I realized, no, I'm usually going to him because I need some sort of rescue at the moment, instead of just a conversation with my dad who loves me so well.
I love the way you were talking about that. We do tend to pray when we're in a crisis. But I do think God wants us to be able to talk with him naturally. You know, Gary, when I pick you up from the airport, or John, when I pick you up from the airport, we just start chatting in the car about, you know, what happened that day. And I think part of prayer and part of hearing God, if conversation is the point, if we're right about that, I think God likes us to say, you know, God, I'm just having a hard time today. This is difficulty. I feel like I have too many things to do and I'm just struggling. And I'm just sharing with him just the way I would share with John or Gary on the phone or in the car. I think, you know, you guys have heard this story, I think. I might have put it in the book. I can't remember. When I was a senior in high school, I really liked this one girl and I was going to go out on a date with her. And I sort of wanted to impress her. And I was talking to my mom for advice, you know, and she said, just be yourself. And I said, well, what does that mean? You know, she says, well, you know, ask her questions about her and then let her ask questions about you. And I sort of took half of her advice. I asked this woman questions. I'd say, you know, what does your dad do? Do you like that? Do you enjoy it? But I just didn't share anything about myself. And let's just say that relationship went nowhere really quickly. And when the woman ended it, she said, I just never got to know you. I mean, she didn't say I was a bore, but she was saying I was a bore. And I realized that I was sort of stiff, but not being natural. And I think the key in a certain sense to prayer is just being natural. So, you know, say, God, I'm sitting here driving my car. Or, you know, I was rushing to make this call today because I got stuck in a meeting that went long. And I'm driving home and I'm rushing. And I said, I'm talking about a conversation is the point. You know, God, I'm just rushing. I'm just a little, and there's truck, it's really going slow. And, you know, just talk with him. I felt his presence. I wasn't necessarily asking for guidance, but I was just being natural.
Sam, I have a question for you. Whenever we talk like this, I hear this comment more than any other comment, and that is, well, I would love to talk to God like that, but it always seems like a one-way conversation. I never hear him. I talk to him, but I never hear anything back. How would you respond to that person?
I'm just giving you the silent treatment to see how you like that. I would say that I would say that what I do when I'm really not hearing God is I have a little Psalm program. Anybody who wants it can just ask me on Facebook and I'll send you a copy of it. And every day I just read about 20 verses of the Psalm and every day I pick one of those verses to meditate on. And I do find that one of the reasons I don't hear God in these conversations is usually my mind is running a little frantically. And, you know, people will say, just be still before the Lord. Well, that's easier said than done. I mean, at least it is for me. You know, I'm frantically saying, I'm going to be late for this Facebook call. You know, I got to get home quickly. I think one of the ways I still my mind is I meditate just on a verse. Or like, let's say it was Psalm 23. I'd just say, the Lord is my shepherd. And I say, what does that mean for the Lord to be my shepherd? You know, it means he provides for me, he cares for me. And I'm saying, God, as I'm meditating on this verse, speak. And as I quiet myself, I actually find God starts saying, here's how I'm your shepherd. I'm your shepherd if you get to the call on time or not. I'm your shepherd, I'm caring for you, and I'm making sure things will work out. And if works out means the call starts 5 minutes late, I'm your shepherd, I'm going to take care of you. You know, so I feel like when I'm not hearing God in a conversation, I will normally just take a phrase or part of a verse and just slowly meditate on it. What does this mean? And I'm inviting God into that conversation. I'm saying, God, what do you mean when you say the Lord is my shepherd?
You know, and with that thought, I think, you know, sometimes the most meaningful, powerful conversation we have with someone, a good friend, a spouse, is when they simply listen, right? They just let you talk. They let you kind of discover what's really in your heart and what you're struggling with as you start to just speak it out loud, kind of work through it in the moment. And I do think that God probably does that sometimes, where he's just silent because he's saying, keep talking, keep working through this, keep speaking it out loud, what it is you're going through, or you're afraid of, or you're wondering about, or questioning, or suffering over. So I do think there is that aspect of God, that sometimes in his silence, he's just simply, maybe has that hand on our shoulder and looking us in the eyes. I love this idea of just be yourself. And you were mentioning Bob and a praying life. And he's often also talked about just be yourself, just pour out your heart to God. That's what a father wants you to do. He doesn't want you to make an appointment and get to the point. Now, I think there probably have been some of us have had fathers who have been like that, but that's not, as you said, that's not our Father, our Heavenly Father, because he said he's better than even the best father on this earth. So I do have to remember, right? He's not saying, don't disturb me unless you can make an appointment. You need to get to the point, and let's not make this long. He's rather, as you said, the one who's constantly with us and just saying, just talk, just pour out your heart. I do. And so Sam, say a little more, as John was asking about, and you're going to get to this. I know this is another chapter in your book, but just the varied way that God speaks to us. And when we don't understand that, he's speaking, we're not listening because we're dialed into something else where he's not on that channel at that point.
Gary, that's a great point. That's just what I was thinking of as I heard you sharing, is I do think sometimes, to answer John's question, is I sometimes don't hear God because I'm so intent on one topic. I'm controlling the conversation. We've all been with people who control the conversation, haven't we? And where, I had a friend once who played the bass guitar, and I'm telling you, every conversation you had with him came around to the bass guitar. You're talking about the World Series, and he starts talking about, this is not you, John, by the way. Sorry. I forgot. And you're talking about, what you're going to do for summer vacation. He starts talking about getting new frets on his bass guitar. And you're talking about, the latest movie you just watched. He talked about getting new strings for his bass guitar. He could bring it back to his bass guitar no matter what the topic was. And I sometimes think I'm sort of that way with God, where I'm saying, God, I got to get home to this Facebook meeting, on time, and there's a truck in front of me. And I feel like God's saying, I just want you to know that I'm your loving shepherd father. And that's good enough. And I can miss it because he's not addressing my issue. How am I going to get home on time?
And Sam, one of the points you bring up in the chapter was often, as he just wants to converse with us, what's on his heart to say to us, where he wants to lead us at that moment, often somewhere in that is the guidance we're looking for. He's going to get to it, but he knows what lies beneath, where we're struggling or where we are wondering, and guidance often comes in the conversation. Like you were saying with your dad, the instruction came in the conversation, but the whole conversation wasn't about instruction.
Yeah, which is really, this is the way God works, isn't it? I find that God, I find one of the ways I hear God, and John, this is, people might be able to dispute this, but I have C.S. Lewis to back me up on it. But I used to have a friend who always would say, let's go wrestle with God, and it never felt right to me. He's referring to Jacob, and he says, let's wrestle with God. And I always sort of thought, I don't know, my arm's too short to box with God. But then I read this Chambers devotional on it, and I don't remember where it is in his My Utmost for His Highest, but he talks about wrestling before God. And that just struck me as right. So when I'm struggling with an issue, I'm going to keep going back to, I was running late for this meeting. And I can just wrestle in the presence of God, and I can say, God, I'm anxious, I'm going to be late. And then I can say, no, why am I anxious? Is it the end of the world if the meeting starts 3 minutes late? Why am I anxious? Am I trying to impress? What am I doing, God? And as I wrestle with God, which is the thing Gary's talking about. I sort of talk it through. I do think that God is in some ways guiding my thoughts. You know, I hadn't planned to do this, but I was just looking it up while Gary was talking. In my preface, at the very end of my preface, I have this poem that C.S. Lewis wrote about, I think, about hearing God. He's saying, I want to hear your voice. I want to know. He says, I'm talking. And finally he'll run out of things. And this is what he says. He says, then seeing me empty, meaning I finally run out of words, you forsake the listener's role, and through my dumb lips breathe and into utterance wake the thoughts I never knew. And I sort of thought that, you know, I have experienced that from God, where I'm starting by saying I'm anxious about this truck going late. And I say, now, why am I anxious? What am I trying to do? And as it goes on, I feel like God inserts himself into my thoughts and gives me an insight into some false anxiety that I have, or an idol that I have, or it's just some way that I'm missing hope and trust in God. So I really do agree with you, Gary. Hey, we got to wrap this up. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
John?
I just love the conversation. And I was thinking as you were talking, I just want to go have a conversation with God right now. I mean, you really motivated me.
Yeah, this has been, well, your illustration was right there. I just really love this conversation you said. Right, that's the point. Conversation is the point. That's perfect. So, yeah, this has been really good. So everyone, thank you for joining us. This has been good, Sam. Thank you for this. Next week, we will go back into It's Your Call. We'll hit another topic on calling, probably out of chapter 3. We'd love for you to join us again and invite others into this, and even forward this to others on Facebook. Put it on your own page and maybe send this to other places. So we really enjoy doing this. And just to let you know, if you can put a comment under this video at any time, and we will try to respond to it. We would love to do that. So Sam, thank you for leading us into the subject. Thank you for the book that you wrote. John, it was so good to have you on. Not simply behind the scenes, but on camera in the conversation with us. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.